In today's Conundrum, we will cover the case of Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, a Soviet serial killer who terrorized the Russian SFSR, the Ukrainian SSR, and the Uzbek SSR between 1978 and 1990. Infamous by the names the Butcher of Rostov, the Rostov Ripper, and the Red Ripper, Chikatilo carried out heinous acts of sexual assault, murder, and mutilation. His victims numbered at least 52 women and children. In April 1992, Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders, leading to his trial. The court proceedings focused on 53 of the cases, resulting in his conviction in October 1992. He received the death sentence for 52 of the murders. However, in 1993, the Supreme Court of Russia determined that insufficient evidence existed for 9 of the killings. Chikatilo's heinous acts earned him the chilling monikers of the Rostov Ripper and the Butcher of Rostov, due to the majority of his crimes being committed in the Rostov Oblast of the Russian SFSR. Finally, in February 1994, Chikatilo met his fate through execution by gunshot. Welcome back to Conundrum, where we delve into the history of serial killers. If you like this type of content, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss any of my future uploads. Andrei Chikatilo was born on the 16th of October 1936 in the village of Yabluchny in the Ukrainian SSR. He grew up in extreme poverty during the famine caused by Stalin's agricultural policies. Chikatilo's parents worked as collective farm laborers and struggled to feed the family. He endured hunger and often resorted to eating grass and leaves to survive. His mother told him stories of his older brother being kidnapped and cannibalized by neighbors, though the truth of this remains uncertain. Chikatilo experienced the horrors of World War II, witnessing bombings and shootings during the Nazi occupation. He suffered abuse from his mother for bedwetting and wore tattered clothing to school due to poverty. Despite his hardships, Chikatilo excelled academically and sought solace in reading and studying. His teachers recognized his intelligence and praised his academic achievements. In his teens, Chikatilo excelled academically and became deeply involved in communism. He held positions as the editor of his school newspaper and chairman of the Communist Party Committee. However, he also struggled with chronic impotence, which intensified his social awkwardness and self-hatred. His first crush, Lilia Barasheva, remained unfulfilled as he was too nervous to ask her out. After graduation, Chikatilo's application to Moscow State University was rejected. He worked as a laborer in Kursk before enrolling in a vocational school. In his first serious relationship, he struggled with impotence, leading to its eventual end. After vocational training, Chikatilo worked on a construction project in Nizhny Tagil and pursued engineering courses. In 1957, he was drafted into the Soviet Army, serving as a border guard in Central Asia, and later in a KGB communications unit in East Berlin. He had a commendable record and joined the Communist Party before his military service ended in 1960. Following his service, Chikatilo returned to his hometown and briefly worked on the collective farm with his parents. He entered a relationship with a divorcee, but their attempts at intimacy failed due to his impotence. When word got out among his peers, he felt deep shame and attempted suicide by hanging. Fortunately, his mother and neighbors intervened and saved him. Fearing the judgment and rejection, he decided to escape from his homeland. After relocating to a town near Rostov-on-Don in 1961, Chikatilo worked as a communications engineer. His sister, Tatiana, lived with him briefly before getting married. In 1963, Chikatilo married Feodosia Odnacheva, introduced to him by his sister. They had a daughter in 1965 and a son in 1969. In 1964, Chikatilo enrolled at Rostov University, studying Russian literature and philology. He completed his degree in 1970. He briefly worked in sports management before becoming a teacher of Russian language and literature in Novoshakhtinsk. However, Chikatilo struggled to maintain discipline in his classes and was often mocked by his students. In May 1973, Chikatilo committed his first known assault on a 15-year-old girl, forcefully groping her while she struggled. Months later, he assaulted and beat another teenage girl. Despite complaints and witnessing, he faced no consequences. His predatory behavior led him to invade girls' dormitories and loiter around public toilets. Chikatilo's teaching career ended in March 1981 due to multiple complaints of child molestation. He then took on a supply clerk job, but his violent and twisted desires would soon escalate, unleashing a reign of terror and gruesome crimes. In September 1978, Chikatilo committed his first documented murder in Shakhty. He lured 9-year-old Yelena Zakotnova to a hut he had secretly purchased. During the assault, he failed to achieve an erection and, in frustration, choked and stabbed her, ejaculating as he did so. Chikatilo then strangled her unconscious and disposed of her body in the nearby river. Evidence pointed to Chikatilo, but another man, Alexander Kravchenko, was wrongly arrested. Despite having a strong alibi, Kravchenko was coerced into confessing and convicted for the murder. Chikatilo, fueled by his dark desires, found gratification in stabbing and slashing his victims to achieve sexual arousal. He struggled to resist these urges, often cutting short trips to avoid the temptation to find his next victim. On the 3rd of September 1981, Chikatilo lured 17-year-old Larisa Tkachenko to a forest, pretending they would drink vodka and relax. Unable to achieve an erection, he choked and killed her, mutilating her body with his teeth and a stick. 9 months later, on the 12th of June 1982, he encountered 13-year-old Lyubov Biryuk and brutally stabbed and slashed her to death, imitating intercourse. Chikatilo continued his spree, targeting children, runaways, and young vagrants, enticing them to secluded areas and killing them by stabbing, slashing, or strangling. He often mutilated their eye sockets and would achieve orgasm only when he stabbed and slashed them. His adult victims were often prostitutes or homeless women, while children and adolescents of both sexes were lured with various ruses. Chikatilo made minimal efforts to conceal the bodies before leaving the crime scenes. On the 11th of December 1982, he brutally murdered 10-year-old Olga Stalmakhanok, inflicting over 50 stab wounds and mutilating her body. In January 1983, the discovery of 4 victims with similar patterns tentatively linked them to a single killer. Major Mikhail Fedosov led a Moscow police team to Rostov to direct the investigation, known as Operation Forest Path. Forensic analyst Viktor Burakov joined the team and confirmed the presence of a serial killer based on the mutilations and striations on the victims' eye sockets. Chikatilo's next victim, Laura Sarkisyan, was found in June 1983, followed by 5 more victims by September. The accumulation of bodies and the similarities in the wounds forced the authorities to acknowledge the existence of a serial killer. Initially, theories revolved around organ harvesting, satanic cults, or a mentally ill individual. Police focused on mentally ill, homosexual, and pedophile suspects. Confessions were obtained from intellectually disabled youths under brutal interrogation, leading to suicides and the resolution of unrelated crimes. However, bodies continued to be discovered, proving the confessed suspects were not the killer. Additional victims, such as Vera Shevkun and Sergei Markov, were found with characteristic mutilations but differing eye injuries. In early 1984, Chikatilo killed 2 women in Rostov's Park of Aviators. He then lured a 10-year-old boy named Dmitry Ptashnikov away and was seen by witnesses, providing a detailed description of him. Ptashnikov's body was discovered with evidence that pointed to the killer. Chikatilo continued his spree, killing a woman named Tatiana Petrosyan and her 10-year-old daughter, as well as several young women and a 13-year-old boy. He was fired from his job for theft, but found another position shortly after. In August, he killed a 16-year-old girl in the Park of Aviators and lured a 17-year-old girl to the Don River, where he brutally attacked and mutilated her. Chikatilo then went on a business trip before returning and killing more victims, including a young woman, a 10-year-old girl, and an 11-year-old boy. On September 13, 1984, Chikatilo was arrested by undercover detectives for approaching young women and engaging in inappropriate behavior. He was found with a knife, rope, and Vaseline. Although his physical description matched that of a suspect seen with one of the victims, his blood type analysis initially ruled him out as the killer. Chikatilo was convicted of theft and sentenced to 1 year in prison, but was released after serving only 3 months. The charges against mentally disabled individuals who had previously confessed to the murders were dropped. Chikatilo resumed his killings in August 1985 with the murder of Natalia Poklistova in Moscow. The investigation expanded, involving multiple procurators and detectives, and a psychiatrist was consulted to create a psychological profile of the unknown killer. The psychological profile created by Dr. Bukhanovsky described the killer as a reclusive man in his late 40s or early 50s, who had a painful and isolated childhood. He was unable to form romantic relationships with women and experienced impotence. The killer derived sexual pleasure from seeing his victims suffer, using the murders as a substitute for sexual intercourse. The profile suggested that the killer was well-educated, likely married with children, and worked in a profession that required travel. Chikatilo closely followed the investigation, controlling his homicidal urges. For almost a year, no victims matching the killer's signature mutilations were found. Some investigators speculated that the killer may have relocated or changed his modus operandi. In 1987, Chikatilo committed 3 murders while on business trips outside of the Rostov Oblast, none of which were initially connected to the ongoing manhunt. In 1988, Chikatilo resurfaced and continued his killing spree. He murdered an unidentified woman in Krasny Sulin in April, followed by 2 boys in May and July. The victims displayed similar knife wounds to those previously linked to the manhunt, but there were some differences that made investigators uncertain about the connection. However, the murder of a 9-year-old boy named Alexei Voronko in Ilovaisk left no doubt that the killer had struck again. The resurfacing of victims definitively linked to the manhunt led to a new police operation. Plainclothed officers were stationed at railway stations throughout the Rostov Oblast, while undercover agents patrolled smaller stations. The goal was to discourage the killer from striking at prominent locations and to capture him in the act. The police also implemented hidden cameras on trains to gather evidence. Chikatilo's final murder occurred in November 1990. He killed a 22-year-old woman near Donleskov station, where he was observed by an undercover officer. The officer noticed suspicious behavior, such as washing his hands and face at a well and having soil stains on his clothing. When the officer stopped Chikatilo and checked his papers, there was no reason for immediate arrest. However, the officer filed a routine report, which later caught the attention of investigators. After examining reports and conducting further investigations, police placed Chikatilo under surveillance. He was observed approaching young women and children, engaging them in conversation. On November 20th, after 6 days of surveillance, Chikatilo was arrested by plainclothes police officers while wandering around Novocherkassk, attempting to make contact with children. The arrest marked the end of Chikatilo's reign of terror, bringing relief to the investigators and the public. The resurfacing of victims and the pressure from the media and government had intensified the search for the killer, leading to his eventual capture. Upon his second arrest, Chikatilo initially denied his involvement in the murders and complained about being wrongly arrested before. However, during a strip search, a deep flesh wound on his finger was discovered, which was determined to be a human bite. Chikatilo had never sought medical treatment for injury. Further evidence was found in his belongings, including a knife and ropes. Blood group analysis confirmed that his semen matched the blood type of the murderer. The police used a strategy to make Chikatilo believe he was mentally ill and in need of help, hoping he would confess. Eventually, on November 29th, after reading extracts from his psychological profile, Chikatilo burst into tears and confessed to the crimes. He provided detailed descriptions of each murder, drawing rough sketches of the crime scenes. Chikatilo confessed to 36 of the 38 murders and was charged accordingly. Later, he confessed to an additional 20 killings. Chikatilo's trial began on April 14, 1992, and received significant media attention. The judge conducted an open trial, and Chikatilo was questioned in detail about each charge. He often gave dismissive replies, except when accused of stealing personal possessions from the victims. The trial revealed gruesome details of the murders, including Chikatilo's mutilation and cannibalistic acts. On the 14th of February 1994, Andrei Chikatilo's final appeal for clemency was rejected, and he was taken to a soundproofed room in Novocherkassk prison. With a single gunshot behind the right ear, Chikatilo was executed that day. His remains were laid to rest in an unmarked grave within the prison cemetery. End conclusion. Researching the Chikatilo case has been a deeply unsettling experience. Andrei Chikatilo's crimes as one of the worst serial killers in history evoke a profound sense of sadness and horror. Delving into the details of his gruesome acts serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can reside within human beings. Thank you all for watching. Share your thoughts down below, and let's not forget the victims. I'm Alex, and this was Conundrum. Stay curious and stay safe.